Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to explore history's medical mysteries.
Excellent. Well, today we're traveling all the way back to ancient Rome.
Ooh, ancient Rome. Always a fascinating period. What are we looking at? Gladiators, emperors,
Close, but not quite. We're going to be exploring the legacy of Galen,
Galen, the physician.
the one and only.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the angle here?
Well, we're going to be focusing on his contributions to neurology, specifically.
Oh, wow, his understanding of the brain.
Exactly. And get this, his ideas were hugely influential for centuries.
Really?
Centuries.
Seriously, we're talking well over 1,000 years.
I had no idea.
It's pretty mind-blowing.
So where are we getting all this info? What's our source material?
We've got a fascinating Turkish academic paper for this one.
Oh, interesting. A Turkish perspective.
It's called Galen's Neurology.
Catchy title.
Okay.
So what's the mission for this deep dive? What are we trying to figure out? Our goal is to see just how impactful Galen was. And believe me, you'll be surprised at how some of his theories still resonate with us today.
Wow, okay, now I'm really curious. I'm ready to dive in.
Perfect. So picture ancient Pergamum,
Pergamum, that's in,
modern-day Turkey.
Right, of course.
Around the year 129 AD, that's where our protagonist, Claudius Galen, better known as Galen, enters the scene.
Claudius Galenus, huh? Sounds pretty impressive already.
Well, his dad was a pretty successful architect.
Oh, interesting. So, a family of builders, you could say.
And get this, a Stoic philosopher.
Whoa, a philosopher, too. Talk about a well-rounded upbringing.
Apparently that intellectual rigor rubbed off on young Galen. You know, that whole emphasis on logic, reason, virtue.
Makes sense. I bet that had a huge influence on his approach to medicine.
Definitely. And, you know, the paper we're looking at describes Galen as, well, how do I put this?
I got Blenema.
Brilliant, driven,
Okay, I like those qualities.
maybe a tad arrogant.
Ah, the classic, brilliant but arrogant type. I can see it now. Right.
Yeah, I can almost picture him debating circles around his contemporaries.
Totally. I bet he was formidable.
But, hey, that kind of drive explains why he wrote over 500 works on medicine.
500.
Yeah.
Seriously. That's insane. Talk about a prolific career.
That's incredible. He must have been a real workhorse.
Totally. And, you know, this paper even includes a pretty bold statement. It says, until the end of the 19th century, Galen's doctrine of neuroscience remained undisputable.
Wow, until the late 1800s. That's a pretty long run.
Oh.
Undisputable, huh?
Yeah, that's quite a legacy. So it makes you wonder, what exactly were these ideas that held such sway for centuries? What was so revolutionary about Galen's view of the brain?
Yeah, I'm hooked. Let's get into it.
All right, so think back to what was considered common knowledge back then, you know, the prevailing theories.
Okay, let me see if I can remember this. Wasn't Aristotle pretty big back then?
Huge.
And he believed that the heart, right? The heart was the seat of the soul.
Bingo.
Yeah, and that it controlled the body, right? Absolutely. That was pretty much accepted as fact.
Wow, so the brain was just kind of...
Yeah, almost an afterthought. Like, it was there, but not really doing much.
Okay, so how did Galen shake things up?
Well, Galen challenged that entire notion.
Brave move going against Aristotle.
Right. But, based on his own observations, he proposed that the brain was the center of sensation.
Sensation, so like our senses, touch, taste, all that.
Exactly. And motor function, too.
Wow, so he was saying the brain was responsible for both feeling and moving.
Right. A pretty radical idea for the time, completely upending the established view.
And he didn't just come up with this out of thin air, did he?
No, not at all. He wasn't just speculating. He actually backed up his claims with detailed anatomical studies.
Okay, so he was doing dissections.
He was, but there's a catch. Dissecting human bodies was totally taboo back then.
Oh, right. I forgot about that. So how did he study the brain if he couldn't dissect humans?
He mainly relied on dissecting animals.
Animals. That seems a little...
I know, right?
Like, how much can you really learn about the human brain from dissecting, I don't know, a pig or something?
Yeah, that's a valid point.
But I guess he had to work with what he had, right?
Exactly. He did a lot of work with pigs and apes, actually.
Apes. Interesting. I guess they're a bit closer to humans, anatomically speaking.
Yeah, so he would meticulously record his observations,
Painstaking work, I bet.
trying to compare the structures he found in animals to what little he knew about human anatomy.
So kind of piecing together a puzzle with some missing pieces.
Pretty much. And, you know, relying on animal models definitely led to some inaccuracies in Galen's understanding.
I can imagine.
But considering the limitations he was working with, it's actually remarkable how much he got right.
Really? What did he figure out?
He identified different types of nerves, like the cranial nerves.
Oh, wow, the cranial nerves, those are super important for all sorts of functions.
And he even described the sympathetic nervous system.
A sympathetic nervous system. You mean the one responsible for our fight or flight response?
That's the one. Pretty impressive, right?
That's really impressive considering he couldn't even look at a human brain directly.
I know, right? It makes you wonder how he explained how the brain actually controlled the body.
Yeah, that's a good question. If he couldn't dissect humans and didn't have any fancy tools like microscopes, how did he even begin to figure out the functions of all these different parts?
That's where his theory of animal spirits comes in.
Animal spirits. Okay, now that sounds intriguing.
You might sound a bit strange to us now,
I can imagine.
but for Galen, it was a way to explain how signals traveled through the body.
Okay, I'm definitely curious to hear more about these animal spirits.
Yeah.
So, what exactly did he think was happening in those nerves?
Well, to understand Galen's thinking, we need to go back to the ancient Greek concept of pneuma.
Pneuma, okay. Isn't that like...
It literally means breath or air.
Right, right. I remember that from my philosophy classes.
But it was also used to describe a kind of vital life force or energy that animated living things.
Like the spark of life, almost.
Exactly. And Galen took this concept and really elaborated on it.
Oh, so he kind of ran with it.
He proposed that there were actually 3 distinct types of pneuma, each with a specific role in the body. 3 times. Wow. Okay, I'm ready to hear about this 3-part system.
Buckle up, because this is where things get really interesting.
So Galen believed that different organs were responsible for producing each type of pneuma. He starts with what he calls natural spirit, which he linked to the liver.
The liver, okay. So what's this natural spirit all about?
According to Galen, it was the most basic type of pneuma, responsible for things like nutrition,
Keeping us fueled,
growth,
helping us develop.
and the functions we might consider vegetative, the basic processes that keep us alive.
So natural spirit is keeping the body running at its most fundamental level, like a pilot light, always on.
That's a great analogy.
What about the other 2 types?
Okay, the second type is vital spirit,
Vital spirit, okay. Sounds pretty important.
and Galen placed this one in the heart.
So the liver makes natural spirit. The heart makes vital spirit.
He saw it as the source of our energy and vitality,
Makes sense. The heart pumping away, giving us that energy.
responsible for regulating body temperature
Keeping us warm.
and even our emotions.
Our emotions, wow. So our feelings are tied to this vital spirit.
Think of it as the pneuma that gives us our get up and go.
I like it. So we've got the liver for basic functions, the heart for energy and emotions. I'm guessing the brain comes into play with the 3rd type.
You got it. Galen believed that the brain was the seat of the most refined pneuma,
The most refined, huh? Okay, I'm really curious now.
which he called animal spirit.
Animal spirit. Interesting choice of words.
And this was the pneuma that really set humans apart from other animals.
So this is what makes us uniquely human, according to Galen.
It was responsible for sensation, movement, and even our higher cognitive functions, our thinking and reasoning.
Wow, so this animal spirit is like the brain's special sauce, the key ingredient that makes us who we are.
Exactly. He basically saw it as the driving force behind everything the brain does.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together. So tell me, how did he imagine this animal spirit working in the body?
So Galen envisioned a system where the vital spirit produced by the heart would travel to the brain.
Okay, so the heart sends its pneuma up to the brain.
And then, get this, it would be transformed into this supercharged animal spirit.
That's just an upgrade in the brain. I like it.
And then this special pneuma would flow through hollow nerves.
Hollow nerve, so like little tubes.
Yeah, he saw them as a network of pipes carrying signals to all parts of the body.
I can see it now, this animal spirit flowing through those pipes like a communication network.
You got it. So the brain is like a central control station sending out commands via these animal spirit pipelines to the muscles,
Telling them to move,
organs,
keeping them functioning,
and sensory receptors.
bringing information back to the brain.
It's a pretty fascinating system, even if it's not quite how we understand things today.
Definitely. But how did he explain how different parts of the body receive different signals? Like, how did your arm know to move when your leg didn't?
Good question. Well, Galen proposed that there were different types of nerves carrying different types of animal spirit for different purposes.
Okay, so different pipes for different messages.
He noticed that thicker nerves tended to connect to muscles,
Makes sense. Thicker pipes for more powerful signals.
while thinner nerves were more associated with the senses.
Thinner pipes for more delicate information. I like it. It's a pretty intuitive model.
From this, he deduced that the thicker nerves carry the animal spirit for motion,
So like motor nerves.
and the thinner ones carried the animal spirit for sensation.
Sensory nerves. So he was making a distinction between motor and sensory neurons, even if his explanation for how they worked was totally different.
Exactly. He was drawing conclusions based on the anatomical structure of the nerves themselves.
Pretty impressive considering the tools he had available.
Right. And while the idea of animal spirits flowing through hollow nerves might seem far-fetched to us now,
Yeah, a little out there.
for Galen, it was a groundbreaking theory that explained a lot about how the body functioned.
And remember, he didn't have the benefit of modern scientific knowledge. He was working with the tools and concepts available to him at the time.
Exactly. It's important to keep that context in mind.
Definitely. But I wonder, did everyone just accept Galen's ideas without question? Was he just like the ultimate authority on everything?
You might be surprised to learn that Galen was actually a pretty controversial figure in his own time.
Oh, really? I thought he was like the medical rock star of his day.
Well, not everyone agreed with his theories.
Makes sense. There are always different schools of thought, especially in medicine.
Right. And there were ongoing debates about the roles of the brain, heart, and liver.
So the whole brain versus heart debate was already raging back then.
It was. But Galen was a skilled writer
Ah, the power of the pen.
and a powerful orator.
So he could not only write it down, but also argue his case persuasively.
He defended his ideas vigorously.
I can imagine, probably with a lot of passion and conviction.
And over time, his influence grew.
Okay, so how did his ideas become so dominant?
His writings became standard medical texts,
Ah, so they were like the textbooks of the ancient world.
and his theories were taught in medical schools for centuries.
Wow, so generations of physicians were learning Galen's model.
And even when some of his anatomical descriptions were found to be inaccurate,
Like the stuff he got wrong based on the animal dissections?
yeah, that. His broader framework for understanding the nervous system remained largely intact.
So the core ideas stuck, even if some of the details were off.
That's incredible, to think that his ideas had such staying power, even when new discoveries were being made. It really makes you wonder, what eventually led to the decline of Galen's model of the nervous system?
Yeah, at some point, things must have started to shift. When did scientists start to question the whole animal spirit idea?
Well, it was a gradual process.
As scientific methods advanced and new technologies like the microscope emerged, researchers began to, chip away at the foundations of Galen's theories.
So, like, cracks were starting to show in the old model.
Exactly. And one of the first major challenges came from a guy named Andreas Vesalius,
Vesalius, wasn't he
a Flemish anatomist.
Right, and he was working in the 16th century, if I remember correctly.
You got it! And get this, he actually performed human dissections.
Whoa, hold on. He was actually allowed to dissect human bodies.
He was, and he published these incredibly detailed anatomical drawings.
Wait, so he was challenging Galen's anatomical accuracy based on direct observation of human bodies. That's pretty bold, going up against the established authority like Galen.
It was a huge deal. Vesalius pointed out several errors in Galen's descriptions.
Like, Galen, you got this part wrong.
Pretty much. Showing that relying solely on animal dissections had led to some significant inaccuracies.
So it was like, look, I've got the actual human body right here, and it's not quite how you described it in your books.
Exactly. And this was a turning point.
Okay.
It emphasized the importance of firsthand observation.
Not just taking ancient texts as gospel truth.
And it challenged that unquestioned authority of ancient texts.
So it was the beginning of a more, what's the word?
Empirical.
Right, empirical. A more empirical approach to studying the body, moving away from just accepting traditional wisdom.
You got it. And as this empirical approach gained momentum, other discoveries followed that further challenged Galen's model.
Like what? What kind of discoveries?
Well, for instance, in the 17th century, there was William Harvey.
William Harvey? Oh, yeah. Wasn't he the one who...
He revolutionized our understanding of the circulatory system, demonstrating that blood flows in a continuous circuit pumped by the heart.
Right. I remember learning about Harvey's experiments in school. He was basically overturning Galen's ideas about blood flow, right?
Exactly. Galen's ideas were based on this back and forth movement of blood.
Yeah, like tides, almost.
While Harvey showed that it was a continuous circulation.
Wow. So that's a pretty big blow to Galen's model.
And these discoveries, along with advances in things like microscopy and experimental techniques, they all set the stage for a new era of neurological research in the 18th and 19th centuries.
So the ground was really shifting beneath Galen's model, but how did scientists start to replace his animal spirits theory? With a more modern understanding of how nerves actually work.
That's a great question, and that's where things get really electrifying.
Electrifying. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's amazing to think how scientific understanding evolves, like layer by layer, almost like building a house on new foundations.
Mhm.
So how did they go from animal spirits, this almost mystical idea?
To what we know today about nerves and electrical impulses.
Exactly. How did that transition happen?
The shift started with scientists exploring the electrical nature of nerve impulses.
Okay, so moving away from the idea of fluids flowing through tubes.
Challenging that notion, yeah. A key figure here is Luigi Galvani, working in the late 18th century.
Galvani, I've heard that name. Didn't he do some experiments with
Frogs.
frogs? That's right. He showed that electricity could stimulate muscle contractions in frogs.
So zapping them with electricity made their legs twitch.
Pretty much. And that suggested that nerves might be transmitting signals electrically.
Not through some mystical fluid. So goodbye, animal spirits. Hello, bioelectricity.
It was a huge paradigm shift, a real game changer for understanding how the nervous system worked.
Wow, that must have been a pretty exciting time for scientists.
Oh, absolutely. It sparked a whole new line of inquiry. Then, in the 19th century, researchers like Johannes Müller and Hermann von Helmholtz really started to dig deeper.
Deeper into.
How nerves conduct these electrical signals and how our senses perceive the world around us.
So understanding the mechanisms behind those electrical impulses.
And how they translate into our experiences.
That's incredible. It really was the birth of modern neuroscience as we know it.
It was a truly revolutionary period.
It's amazing to see how these pioneers built upon each other's work, even if it meant dismantling long-held beliefs.
Absolutely. It takes a certain kind of courage to challenge the status quo, especially when you're talking about ideas that have been around for centuries.
But that's what drives scientific progress, right?
Exactly. And speaking of progress, where does that leave Galen and his legacy? Was he just plain wrong about everything?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, we've talked about how some of his theories have been superseded by more modern understandings.
It's not quite as simple as saying he was completely wrong.
Okay, so let's give Galen a fair assessment here.
While his physiological theories, like the animal spirits idea, have been replaced,
Yeah, we know those don't quite hold up anymore.
remember he was working with very limited tools and knowledge.
It's easy to judge from our modern perspective, but we have to consider the context.
Absolutely. What's important is that he laid the groundwork.
Okay, so what are we crediting him with specifically?
His detailed anatomical descriptions, particularly of the muscles and bones, were largely accurate.
So he got the structure right, even if the function was a bit off.
And those descriptions provided a foundation for later scientists.
So it's like he drew the first rough map of the territory.
That's a great way to put it, even if some of the landmarks were a bit off.
Right, like those animal spirits rivers flowing through hollow nerve mountains.
Exactly. And don't forget, he was the one who shifted the focus from the heart to the brain as the control center of the body.
Right, that was a huge step, challenging the prevailing dogma of his time.
It was a radical idea at the time, and it set the stage for centuries of research on the brain.
So Galen's legacy is more nuanced than just right or wrong.
It's much more complex than that.
He made some crucial contributions that paved the way for modern neuroscience.
Absolutely. He got some things wrong, but he also asked the right questions and pushed the field forward in important ways.
Well, that's a great takeaway.
And his story reminds us that science is an ongoing process of discovery, refinement, and sometimes, complete overhauls.
It's about constantly building on the work of those who came before us.
And always being willing to challenge what we think we know.
That's a great point. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Galen and his world,
A journey through ancient Rome and the evolution of our understanding of the brain.
what's the final thought you'd leave our listeners with? Something for them to ponder.
I'd say consider this. Imagine being a physician in, say, the Middle Ages. You have Galen's texts, which are considered the ultimate authority on the human body. But you also have these nagging doubts, these observations that don't quite fit with what Galen described.
Ooh, that's a good one. What do? Do you trust your own eyes or the authority of the ancients?
It's a real dilemma, right?
It reminds me that even in science, there's a human element.
With all its biases and assumptions.
We should always be questioning, observing, and testing our understanding of the world.
Just like those brave scientists who dared to challenge Galen's theories.
Exactly. That spirit of critical inquiry is what keeps science alive.
It's what drives us towards a deeper understanding of ourselves and the universe we inhabit.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of Galen and his enduring impact on neurology. It's been a fascinating journey through the history of science, exploring how one man's ideas shaped the way we understand the brain for centuries.
We hope you've enjoyed this exploration.
And that it sparks a curiosity to delve even further into the fascinating world of neuroscience.
There's always more to discover.
Until next time, keep those synapses firing.